Hello, hello. Welcome to this edition of the Law Firm Blueprint. I'm one of your hosts, Jay Ruane, and with me, as always, is my man, Seth. I never know which way to point, Seth, because I never know what your window looks like, but it's all well and all good. We are talking
It depends,
intake.
Jay.
It depends. Oh, here we go with the fucking depends again. Yeah, are the Yankees going to win the World Series? Who knows? It
No, that
depends.
doesn't. That's more. You go more to. So you're saying we have a chance.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But Seth, we've been talking about intake for the last couple of months, and I have some questions for you. And so I want to talk to you, Seth Price, about intake at Price Benowitz. So why don't we start this off? Because I think it's important that people understand sort of where you started and where you wound up and why you went in a particular way. And I'll do the same thing. You can interview me, but I think this could be kind of an interesting way of approaching an intake session on the Law Firm Blueprint. So Seth, tell me about how and you started off with intake. I mean, it
It
sounds
was
to me like
me and a cell phone. That was
okay,
what it was. We started criminal only, and it was me screening for case and money. Half the time when I took it, I remember still answering the phones on Saturdays, Saturday afternoon while getting dressed to go out for the night in my closet, taking calls and thinking, hey, I'm pulling an extra 20,000, over a few calls that my competitors weren't doing. We started, this is 19, 20 years ago. There were boutiques that weren't open on the weekends,
right.
and there were larger chop shops, as I would call them, that really poor quality junior people not knowing what they were doing that would be around. And so we were trying to mold those two. Over time, I passed that cell phone off to a guy.
Okay,
And
so that was my next question.
yeah,
It was literally like a cell phone that you then handed to somebody else who was going to be your assistant on intake.
there
So
wasn't any, they were the one of our very first hires after an admin was intake. It was separate. That admin, she did everything from reception to bookkeeping to paralegaling to you name it. And but the one thing from day one I kept separate was intake.
okay.
That was holy, and that was not reception. And there was a separate number on the phone websites that went to that number. And if somebody called with something else, soliciting or existing client, we got to keep this line is precious. It must be left open. That was the DNA of the firm from day one.
So that's interesting to me because if you've got a guy or a girl who's working that cell phone and the phone call rings in, you can't pass that phone to another body to pick up the second call, right? So like,
We
so
should
so
first, we
so is
should,
this before
but
we get there?
first,
So is this guy like, is this person doing your intake? That's a separate intake. Is that like a 24/7 job, but like you pay them a
yeah,
salary, but
yeah.
they got to be available whenever the phone rings?
Yeah, within reason. We should be so lucky to get two calls at the same time when you start. We used caller ID and would ping
Okay.
people back. This guy, the first, number one, the avatar after me was a guy with the gift of gab better than anybody I've ever met, including the two of us. This guy people would say, I want you in court. The guy's like, I'm a 22-year-old, but he also had a short-term memory issue, so he couldn't remember anything. That hurt. That was a downside. So we forced him to write everything down. But that said, it was this before voice over IP and all of that stuff,
Right.
ancient times. But it did the trick. If you missed
One
a
of the
call,
phones like this, the cranks.
you call the caller ID was big, and to a certain extent, there was a lot that was simpler. You didn't miss anything. If it was dinner time, I always said if I had the bat phone, what I aspired to find out is by having screening, which we have now and sort of have talked about on prior shows, that person is supposed to tell you, is it worth getting away from the dinner table, which happens every once in a while, or is this one that'll be waiting for you whenever, and being able to make that distinction. And so, long story short, we went from a guy to a team of three to a team of seven and sort of maxed out in the years before COVID at about 12, 13. There was a
Okay.
point at
And
about, yeah.
and who were you hiring for these roles and what sort of training? I mean, I know I'm asking you to think back now, but
No,
like,
no.
were you hiring for personality? Were you hiring for warm body at that point because you hadn't thought about the intake process and you knew, hey, look, just get the answers, get them on the phone, and I'll figure out how to sell it. Were they doing selling, or were the lawyers doing selling?
The
Like, with I
lawyers
mean,
at the end, though, our model has always been outside of PI. PI is easy. I won't say easy, but much, much easier in that it's a signature. There's no money involved, right? So we've had Falkowitz on our series. We get it. And I will tell you that as we expanded, we're now a third PI, that as we built the firm, that the people that didn't take for criminal did not do well for PI. And as we added PI, it's two different. So it's a whole nother piece. The personality is very, very different. And the skill set needed is different. It's my model pre-COVID was in office, recent college grads, 2-year stint before law school. We've talked
okay,
about this at nauseum as law school became less popular. Nobody, the moment we started hiring people not going to law school, we were effed because there was no loyalty. The moment somebody paid them $2 an hour more, they were gone. And it was a different model, which is what forced us January of 21, thanks to your prodding, to build out the international team. And that's why I love having an international layer to screen out everything. And I don't want this to be a huge, long wait, but pick your poison, right? Waiting to speak to somebody in the first place, or having somebody who bond connects, figures out what's viable, and getting that to a rock star, to me, is huge. It's not going to our answering service bill went from 5,000 a month to 1,000 a month. That's for overflow or the few minutes that we don't take it. And the idea was leveraging overseas allowed for hours of coverage and an acknowledgement that the non-PI side, the fee for service side, if a lawyer is going to close it at your side or a non-attorney salesperson, that the skill set needed to sift that was probably a lot less than I was paying for and I would use customer service. People work. I remember somebody gave me crap back in the day. I took an Uber pool, like a shared Uber, on my birthday. Met a girl in the car and hired her for the thing. That's how frugal I am. I was going to work. I took an Uber pool, but picked up an employee along the way. But people worked at Pottery
I'm
Barn
surprised.
and
I'm
gas.
surprised you haven't picked up Uber shifts at night to meet more people to see if you can network with
Or
them.
get some reviews. And I actually signed up for Uber Eats. I wanted to take my kids out to I actually went through all the paperwork, just I wanted them to see what experience that piece. And just I live in the suburban bubble. Even that's impossible just to get them to join. Forget about that. But anyway, I digress.
So let
So
me ask you a question about your process, because you have a large portion of people overseas, and I'm sure there's some training,
a lot of training.
a lot of training
A lot of
that
training.
goes into like the culture of the Washington D.C. area, that type of thing, just so that they get an understanding of, you get somebody on the phone who's calling in and they're 15 minutes away, but it's now an hour and a half. The
But to
people
be
need to
fair,
understand.
they're not getting those calls.
Okay.
Our intake still today is intake. If you're coming to the office, it's a different
Okay.
person. I'm
Let me,
not,
let, but
no, no, I
this
know
is
what
what I
you're saying.
want
I
to.
know where you're going. What you're saying is, I have battled with this. Not, I would like our guys to have a cheat sheet on DC sports teams and who won last night and all of that. Because I know back in the day, if we had a military call, it went to Noel. He was our double Purple Heart recipient. There was more of that. I think it's scale. The numbers are so great that I'm more concerned about just getting the facts off the top, right? We're not losing people between the calls. Somebody's going to give you a few minutes to give them the basic parameters.
Mhm.
And then basically, whether it be a lawyer or whether it be a senior person in PI, different team, much more educated, much more sophisticated bunch. But those people, fine, because they're selling. But I think I was not honest about what was selling and what was pre-selling, and knowing that I could, if I were to, and we had an issue, we had an awful office administrator in the days after my longtime COO fell off his motorcycle. We made a hire right as COVID was upon us. We didn't know that, and he wanted me to get rid of the recent college grads that were at like 35, 40, and he wanted me to hire real people at 60 to 70 and rent more office space. Imagine if I had done that in the days before COVID, I would have been effed.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do now is basically we get so many calls that come in. If we're able to get just the wants into the hands of people who then can have those more sophisticated conversations, it is a more cost-effective way. That's my current thinking, is that I don't need the very, very first person to be the person who knows all the roads around us. Will there be a moment of cringe? I'm sure there is. But that I have found it cost-effective to allow for a screening level of highly trained, although not locally savvy as much. I aspire to be more every day, but that these people can get the wheat. And then I'll put the dollar resources behind the people once we know what is wheat and what is not.
Let me ask you how you tackle a problem that I think happens more often than not when you have a large intake team. And it's this. I'm going to give you a situation. So, a law clerk in federal court in Western Virginia looks at a file and says, "Oh, I need to call Attorney Benowitz and tell them that such and such has happened." So they go on Google, they type in Price Benowitz, they get a tracking number that's associated with your intake team, and the phone call comes right into intake. And someone says, "I need to talk to Attorney Benowitz." And they say, "Sure, let me take some information from you. I'm a law clerk at Judge so and so. I need to talk to Attorney Benowitz. Can you tell me about what type of problem you're having? You know what I mean?
But I think,
Because that can really tick off.
well, look, I
And
no, because what is clear is once it's identified that it's not a potential case, they immediately disclose who they are and what they're doing, and it gets somewhere else. And if anything, we get like, wow, I'm not used to that. Because
so what do they say? I'm an intake person. You
yes, I'm
call
on
this
the
number.
this is our intake hotline. It's for reserved for incoming calls. Let me get your information, I'll send it to him, or let me transfer it over. But from day one, when we had the cell phone, that was my attitude. It gets salespeople off the phone.
Yeah.
This is a precious number. And look, talk about systems. They aren't trained in all that other stuff. They know media calls. They send an email to these people, like but and they're supposed to ask them, look, you get this, everybody watching this, what percentage of your calls that are media calls are truly to get you on air that night, or somebody wanting to sell you ad time,
I'd say
right?
it's 99% selling ad time.
Right. So the question is, are you on deadline, and is this a sales call? Because if they're a reporter, they'll say no, this is not. Versus if it's a sales guy, you get some wishy-washy answer.
Right.
Um, and by the way, 90% of them seem to come from the Seattle area code. So know that Seattle is going to be a sales call. So, it is again, I have a hot mess because I have PI and criminal and family. And they're all these different areas, and they have to keep track of a bunch. But that's why I moved to Salesforce years ago. I needed that level of sophistication.
Do you have people that just do criminal or just do family or just do PI intake? Or do
No,
all
it's
your intake people do any type of law that you have?
if PI is its own pod, which is
Okay.
a much more sophisticated pod, 1/3 international, 2/3 domestic, versus everything else is now 80% international, 20% domestic.
Gotcha.
And
And
yeah,
and then here's the final question I have for you is how do you know when it's time to hire more people in intake?
to me, they don't have to ask me twice, especially on an international. I'm like, sure. In fact, what I'm constantly saying, and I probably is that I'm always asking who is underwater, who is not performing. Is there a person that if you had this is the issue? And again, if you told me to go back, what I always remember in growth mode, the worst thing, and this, if you have somebody who's not performing, it's bad, right? You want to let them go because they are not hitting, not just close to your stand, they are well below. They shouldn't be with your team. But if you let them grow and you're growing, you're completely effed
Yeah.
because now you're two people down. You need a person, you don't have them. And so that is why I will almost never say no to a new hire. If you can get it, it is a constant machine to fill. It's like a drug. And my feeling is every person I hire makes me more money. That this isn't like, if you have two people and you get a third, what does that do? It allows you to take more there, and then for you to have an honest conversation of those three. Is there one that's not making the cut?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
again,
and
this
that's
is
the question. I mean, when's the best time to fire somebody? The first time you think of it.
right, but with intake, and it's I'm only now getting to this point, 20 years in, my 30th person, where I'm actually at the point where I'm like, you know what, we have the bandwidth. And I remember our head of intake was wonderful. We should have her on the podcast sometime. She's not forward facing much, but she is incredible. And I would say to her, she had one or two bad situations where we didn't have that extra bandwidth. I'm like, take a shot. At the time she had 20 some odd people. I'm like, it's okay, you'll get through it. And she's like, oh my God, this was so liberating. If somebody is really not doing what they're supposed to be doing, this isn't a close call. This isn't like, oh, I don't like their. This is somebody who's like, and you've been there, I've been there, but unless you are quote unquote overstaffed, you can't do it and you're stuck with them. So we talk a lot about like how much you're in the business, how much you're out of the business. And even when you get out, and you've tried to get out a few times in the time I've known you over the last few years, and you've been sucked in when the person two or three
Right.
gives their resignation letter, right? Now, if you had four extra lawyers, that wouldn't be the case, but then your economics are thrown off. To me, this is one of those places. Easier advice to give than to take. But if you're able to excess hire in this space, first, 80% of the time, it'll never happen because through natural attrition, as you're building,
Right.
you'll lose a person by the time that gets there. Second, if they're there and you have an honest conversation with yourself, you likely have somebody that you've outgrown and need to move on from, possibly, right? And then finally, God forbid, if you're in growth mode and you get an extra person and there's a second of breathing space, God forbid, you get to add some extra time for intake, for reviews. God forbid, you get to make some check-in calls with prior clients. You will never not have a monetizable use of that person. So to me, it is like a drug, and the more good you can get with the correct supervision, because then same stuff we've talked about on other segments of our show with ops, unless you have management, there's a moment like 6, 7 intake people where all of a sudden you have a person who's not on the phone. And you're like, what the hell? I'm paying for a whole body that's not talking to people. And I'm like, that's crazy. But if you don't, it doesn't work. And then you
Right.
get to a point where not only do you have, again, later, where you have a person who's not on the phones and then multiple managers beneath them, that's when stuff. Now, the advantage of that is when stuff really hits the fan, you have that extra capacity. If somebody quits, you're not sitting there with the phones not being answered. But those are life moments when you get to the point where there's a non intake person as part of that team, where at first it starts as a player coach, and then as you move on, there's a person who's really not on the phones, who's just hiring and training. Then I feel like you're really getting somewhere and you have the ability to hire more, because until you get to that point, who's doing the hiring? Who's doing the training? And
Right.
if you can't answer those questions hard, what are you waiting for manna from heaven to happen to fall into your lap and then hope that they figure out the wiki that's sitting in the office that hasn't been updated in 2 years? So, and I can't tell you, even at my level, the number of times there's something in the wiki, I use that as the J term, but something in our Salesforce that isn't really what I want done. And it takes on an effing life of its own. So the more that you have a person that you trust as that deputy to make sure that it doesn't go running off the tracks, and it's not, it depends, but rather there is a set of J systems and rules in place, you'll be better off. But it is that extra bandwidth to manage the team and that you live and die by that person. I've been there. I was in the desert. I had a guy who was off his meds. It was awful. Had two, over the years. And when you find a great one, you hang on for dear life, because, a bad one, we see our numbers in retrospect. You don't know why your numbers are down. You've talked to me. I've talked to you at times when you're like, yeah, it's not a great month. And I'm guessing if we were to go back and play that over the last 7, 8 years that you and I have talked regularly, that if we played those things and you correlated it with whoever was in charge or whoever your senior person was, pretty good chance they were not as good as you thought they were.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of attention. As lawyers, we think a lot about delivering the client services, filing the right motion, making sure that we've buttoned up and shepherdized cases and that type of thing. But the intake and sales is really the oxygen to the law firm. And if you don't have that firing correctly, you're really going to be in a bad place. I mean, you need to, and this leads me to a bigger question, is that and maybe maybe I shouldn't even ask this question because it's going to be a whole nother show. But
We'll tease it and we can talk about it later.
so here's the question. I had dinner 2 weeks ago. My father won a Lifetime Achievement Award from our state criminal defense lawyers association. Very nice. He's been doing this for 47, 48 years. And he got up and he got to give a speech. And I'm sitting next to my brother-in-law, who happens to be an attorney. But he doesn't practice law. He's in a Fortune 500 company in there on the director level. And we were talking about just the practice of law, and my father mentioned in his acceptance speech about how law, back when he started in the 70s, law was a vocation, and now it has become a business. And I said, I think that's a shot at me, but it is what it is. And I turned to my brother, I said, it has always been a business. Just it was a lot easier to do business when there was no competition and no advertising, and everyone just passed cases back and forth.
Or it was a business and you didn't know it. I mean, look,
Right.
think about it. That was a business that almost went under for your dad. Story for
But
another
that's the point of my question. Are we in an echo chamber? Because Seth, I've known you now for 15 years. We've talked about the same stuff over and over. Yes, in the last decade, there has been an explosion of Facebook groups, podcasts, mastermind events, seminars, and all of that stuff. But guess what? I see, for the most part, the same audience at all of these things. I mean, there are always some new people who show up, and there are some old people who have left. But the legal entrepreneur, business-focused law firm owner in the fee-for-service or small law firm space is a very, very small community that basically is spouting out the right things that they've learned and helping each other navigate this and build business. But there is an entire cohort of lawyers that don't care to know anything what we know, are perfectly happy getting 1 or 2 referrals a week or a month, working those files, maybe writing a will this week, next week doing a bankruptcy, and they're perfectly happy with doorway law. And are we in this echo chamber unable to see that there is something that you can gain from just not scaling your law firm, not building a business? And do we get sucked into this echo chamber where, hey, it's the same faces, the same people posting on LinkedIn and running events?
Jay, I don't know what happened to Jay. Somebody got it. No,
I'm reflecting on.
No, I did look. I don't buy this thesis at all. Look, I would say first, it is there are more different groups that we don't even know about. We just interviewed recently a woman who's doing this from Australia, who
right, and that was news to me.
And our original co-host, when we started this podcast during COVID, has figured out that online there's a bunch of people that never leave their house and want to get their coaching that way. And meaning, and if you looked at how many they just got sold, but how many fine law reps that were the old Westlaw reps that went in, and that was so. To me, no, like I would say that if you look at the average number, like average median income of a B2C lawyer in this country, I mean, I've seen numbers and I haven't seen them in a few years, but a couple of years back, it was like 60K.
Right. I think Cleo's trends is like 75 this year.
Right. So look, and I'm making that value judgment, but I'm just saying, you call it in our little echo chamber, that's not a viable number. That if anybody shows up to a John Fisher mastermind and goes there 3 times, I guarantee you that they'll be at 400,000 minimum as a number. I use that as my number because it's the SEO cutoff number. But the idea is that there are certain basic fundamentals that if you put them together, now again, no value judgment. If somebody wants to say a pure solo, great. But what I'm saying is we now have tools and abilities and things that will help you if your goal is to make either a better living, a higher profit margin. You now are at least an educated, to quote the old Cy Sims, right? An educated consumer, so that what you, as a business owner, you can decide what's right for you. You want to stay a single lawyer now, second lawyer, as John Fisher has done, ironically. Great. You want to build to a regional criminal shop like you? Great. You want to be a numbnut like me and have all these different practices, but it allows you to, just the fact, and we've talked about this offline and on prior shows, the fact that people are focused, that as they grow a firm, that it's not just a receptionist or an office admin, but that you're moving towards some sort of law firm administrator, a director of ops. The fact that's a thing is allowing people to then decide, do I want to spend more time working on the practice of law? Do I want to, as one of our guests talked about, work a 5-hour work week? It gives you options, and you want to keep doing things the same way, but at least you're making an educated decision as to how you want to run your firm, and that is the advantage. And I think the echo chamber has a negative connotation. I would like to think of it as the people that are going out there and getting themselves educated and networking with people and learning and growing as in their tribes. That what I've seen across the board, places that we like, places we don't, all these different tribes, I've seen people, and I can name a person in almost every one of these different tribes that has gone from nonsense, making tens of thousands of dollars a year, to a very successful, often 7-figure, plus firm, and doing things on their own terms. So again, if your dad had access to that and had somebody helping him behind the scenes, you may have been taking over a much more substantial
Sure.
firm than a guy who, frankly, didn't have choices, couldn't pivot. And when things got tough, thank God you were there, because but for the grace of God, that was an early retirement.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just I'm curious because I see the same people in my LinkedIn feed, and maybe that's a function of the Google and the LinkedIn and the Facebook. I see the same faces posting the same things, and I'm just thinking there's a whole world out there of lawyers
But think
that.
of it as
But
post.
because think about it, let me just finish my thought. Because you and I both know that we have run into people who've been like, "Oh my God, I heard your podcast, and then I listened to 150 of your episodes, and it blew my mind. And then I did this, and then I did this, and it's like they're just drinking from a fire hose, and they're loving it, and that type of thing. And we've opened up their eyes to how things can be, and that's great. But I'm just wondering, like, how big of an audience is out there for this message if I keep seeing the same things or same people over and over again? I
I
mean,
think
Marco
that there,
Brown, Tom Tona, John Fisher, Mario
look,
Godoy. I mean, I'm seeing these market
but those are the
leaders,
leaders in the
people I
space.
respect, you know?
Look, when people post, when I post things in the legal space, they're getting anywhere from 1,000 to 6,000 views. That means there are people out there that don't have the voice of a Tona or a Marco Brown, or these people that are really interesting and creative and out there, and sort of and becoming thought leaders in their space. But there's also tons of people out there who are, trying to get through life with a wife and kids, or a husband and kids, who are building their firm, and they listen to an episode and they grab some value. I mean, you know how many lawyers are out there statistically. And I think that there's a group that likes the in-person, and we see them over and over again, but they're entire virtual tribes that play within their own closed Facebook groups that you never see.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering. Like, how can we scale this to get more people to realize these resources are out there? I guess this is my ploy, my not my ploy, but my ask of everybody who's in the audience now is, there are lawyers in your market who want to do better at running a business. Maybe you've mentioned this to them over coffee, or you've seen them at a courthouse, and you talk about, oh, well, I was trying to, I did some advertising in Google, it kind of went nowhere, or something like that. What I'm saying is, hey, if you've gotten something out of this, help us find more people, because I want to hear from the next generation of people, because look, we built a foundation. I'm not gonna grow about how great I am, but My time is almost done in what I can iterate and give to people. But the foundations that we can start as legal entrepreneurs, imagine if you were 25 years old coming out of law school now, how many more resources you have and how many more opportunity you have. I want to talk to those lawyers. I want to talk to the person who's 35, who's been doing it for 5 years and is saying, hey, look, I need to find something out there, and opening the door to these resources that are out there is a great opportunity. So, folks, if you're hearing this, share this far and wide, because I want to do a session. We've done intake. We're talking about AI in the coming year, but I think in the second or third quarter of next year, Law Firm Blueprint should be focused on talking to people who are literally just starting out and where they're getting their inspiration from and where they're getting their ideas from. Because we found each other in the back of a conference room, because that's how Seth and I met. Like, we met as everybody else was talking up front. We were like, well, how about intake? How about marketing? What about Google? That type of thing. There's other people out there. I'm just wondering where they are, because we're seeing the same names all the time.
But a couple things. I mean, like there's a lot wrapped up there, but I would say one thing that I would say is that and you've said this before, it's what we do is we like it, so we do it. I have friends who are practicing lawyers outside of B2C law. They're not built for this. I remember I got in a fight with a close friend of mine. He couldn't decide 12, 13 years ago, should he be on LinkedIn or Facebook? I'm like, both, MF. Like, it's like, he's like, well, I hear that LinkedIn's really better for business. I'm like, no, Facebook is where even if you're a civil litigator and you're able to connect with somebody who's going to give you the business. Nobody's going to like look you up on LinkedIn and say, I need a civil litigator. You're a dime a dozen. But if somebody knows, likes, and trusts you and has a connection from work or religious institution, whatever it is, you're going to bond. So to me, I think that we have great resources. We do it because we like it. If somebody sees value, great. But I wouldn't make the value judgment that they should go that way. I see some people coming up where and we go to a mastermind and somebody's like all excited about building a firm. And there are times when I can play chess a few steps ahead, and I'm not wishing this on them. I'll give them as much support as I can, but they're not the stress. You talk about this. It's not a lifestyle for everybody. And
Oh,
that there are
definitely.
times when if you can go and get a paycheck at a number that makes you happy and a spouse gets, and you're able to shut it off at a certain hour and build a great life and career, God bless. It is, for the beautiful mind that's all over the place. It suits my ADHD well, but like for a lot of people, this is no way to live.
I wonder if there is an ADHD component to law firm entrepreneurs. Because I know
Entrepreneurs in
I,
general.
I I know I have it. I know you have it. I know a number of people in our roles. We have this thing where we're going 100 miles an hour in five different directions, and yet we're able to keep the balls up in the air and juggling them. And I'm just wondering if
Well, part of it's think about we just talk about all the things that make up this show and a law firm, right? We got intake, we have ops, we have the legal production, we have the marketing. I mean, think about it. Who in their right mind is going to start out and say, I'm going to figure all of this stuff out and keep those balls in the air? And I mean, it's what I love about it. But it is, there are people that are, as you sort of started out with, who say, look, I want to do DUI law. I got enough people that are going to refer to me. I'm going to make a living. I don't need to scale it that much. Maybe I'll do a little Google. Maybe I won't. But I don't need to go beyond that. And I can have a perfectly great career in life.
yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, it's so. All right, folks. I guess it's a bit of a therapy session. It is
That's how we
my ask.
started out our show. We're back to it.
Yeah, maybe. And folks, that's going to do it for the Law Firm Blueprint. We're done. This is our last episode. I can't do that. There's always stuff to talk about, but I mean that's really the thing. I mean the question is where do we go from here? I'd like to think we have some good opportunity, but we're always looking for feedback. So please give it to us, and please share the show. Let people find out about it, because if we can help one more person, I know Seth would appreciate it. I certainly would too. My role in life, I've found, is to be like Johnny Appleseed, give as much away as possible. Because if I can be a man for others, I can sleep happy at night and die with a smile, knowing that I was there for my family and there for other people that needed help. So I guess that's a long way of saying that's going to do it for this edition of the Law Firm Blueprint. Thank you for being with us this week. Of course, you can take us anywhere you want to go by taking us with the podcast edition, which is available wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to give us a 5-star review. I'd like to get 10 5-star reviews this week. So just take a moment and give us that review. And of course, you can catch us live every week, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific in the Law Firm Blueprint, which is a registered trademark now, Seth, Facebook group, as well as live on LinkedIn under
But
Seth's
by the way, we
profile.
need to flex a little bit. There are a bunch of people have been invading our mark.
Oh, I trust me. I have a whole bunch of cease and desist letters ready to go out.
Or just on the first, I'd start with the nice one saying, "Hey, we got a mark. Would you mind?" Like, I've been the recipient of it. I don't know. Maybe it's the wrong. Maybe the only way to do is that way. But I think a nice by the way email is not the worst thing in the world.
Definitely not. We have the mark. We have the R ball. Let's flex our muscles. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. Thank you so much for being with us. Bye for now.